7 days. That's how long it took for the Middle East to move from uneasy peace to the brink of a regional war. Missiles, drone swarms, airstrikes across multiple countries. The United States and Israel launched attacks on Iran. Iran struck back. And suddenly, American bases across the Middle East were under fire. But here's the strange part. Despite the explosions, the threats, and the terrifying headlines, many analysts believe this war might actually end sooner than people think. So what's really happening? Why did this war start? Why might it end quickly? And why could the biggest consequences hit countries that aren't even fighting? Clara will break it down. Buckle up and let us go. It started with airstrikes. Late at night, on the last day of February 2026, explosions lit up the skies across several Iranian military facilities. The United States and Israel had launched coordinated strikes targeting sites linked to Iran's missile and nuclear programs. For years, tensions had been rising. Israel believes Iran is trying to build nuclear weapons. Iran says its nuclear program is peaceful. But behind the scenes, both countries have been fighting a shadow war for decades. Cyber attacks, assassinations, sabotage. This time, it went public. And Israel is not alone. Not with the US at its back like before, but fighting together with it side by side. And then something happened that shocked everyone. Iran didn't just respond. It responded fast. Within days, missiles and drones were launched across the Middle East. Hundreds of them. Some were aimed at Israel. Others targeted American military bases in the region. And suddenly the war had expanded. Not just between two countries, but across an entire region. Iran's retaliation was not random. It was calculated. Instead of striking the United States directly, Iran targeted American bases spread across the Middle East. These bases exist in countries like Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, which means something important. When Iran attacks those bases, missiles land inside other countries. That's exactly what happened. Explosions were reported near multiple American facilities. Air defense systems lit up the skies. And for a moment, it looked like the entire region might ignite. But here's the question. If Iran can hit US bases across the Middle East, why didn't the United States immediately launch a massive war? The answer is more complicated than it seems. At first glance, that is a major conflict. But if we look deeper, none of the three main players actually wants a long war. Not the United States. Not Israel. And not Iran. Let's start with the United States. 30 years ago, the United States dominated global warfare. In 1991, during the Gulf War, the US military crushed Iraq in just weeks. In 2003, the invasion of Iraq toppled Saddam Hussein's government in only 19 days. Back then, American military power looked unstoppable. But something changed after that. 2 wars. 20 years. Trillions of dollars. Iraq and Afghanistan became the longest wars in US history. And they taught the world something important. Even the world's strongest military can struggle to control another country. So today, America prefers a different strategy. Instead of massive invasions, it uses precision strikes, drones, and limited operations. Quick. Targeted. And politically easier to manage. But there's a downside. Limited wars are easier to start, but much harder to control. Israel has its own reasons for striking Iran. For decades, Israeli leaders have warned that Iran getting nuclear weapons would be an existential threat. So Israel has repeatedly tried to slow down Iran's nuclear program. Cyber attacks. Covert operations. Air strikes in Syria. But this time, the stakes were higher. Because attacking Iran directly risks triggering a much bigger war. And here's where things get really interesting. Israel hoped something might happen inside Iran. Something political. Something that could weaken the Iranian government itself. But so far, that hasn't happened. Iran's leadership understands something important. A full war with the United States would be devastating. America's military power is still enormous. Iran knows that. So Iran's strategy usually follows a pattern. Respond strongly. Show strength. But avoid total escalation. In other words, fight just enough to make your opponent think twice. And that is why Iran targeted American bases instead of American cities. It sends a message. We can hurt you. But it avoids crossing certain red lines that might trigger a full invasion. It's a dangerous balancing act. And the entire region is watching. Now we arrive at one of the most overlooked parts of this conflict. The Gulf states. Countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar and Kuwait. These countries are incredibly wealthy. They've spent billions building futuristic cities, financial centers, and tourism hubs. Some of them are trying to become the Dubai of the future. But there's a problem. They sit right in the middle of the Iran-US rivalry. And many of them host American military bases. So when Iran retaliates, their territory becomes the battlefield. Imagine you have an investor deciding where to build $1 billion project. Option 1. A stable country. Option 2. A country where missiles might fly overhead during a geopolitical crisis. Not a difficult choice. And that's why this war could shake investor confidence across the region. The Middle East isn't just politically important. It's economically critical. About 1/5 of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow shipping lane sits right next to Iran. If fighting escalates and that route closes, the global economy could feel the shock. Oil prices jumped almost immediately after the conflict began. And higher oil prices ripple through everything. Gas prices, food costs, inflation, and global markets. In other words, even people thousands of miles away could feel the impact. While the Middle East worries about war, another country might quietly benefit. Russia. Higher oil prices mean higher revenue for Russian energy exports. There's also another advantage. Western countries supporting Ukraine might shift attention and weapons toward the Middle East. If that happens, Ukraine could receive less support. And that would change the balance of another war entirely. What about China? China is also watching closely. China imports large amounts of energy from the Middle East. But it also has diversified suppliers and massive industrial capacity. So while higher oil prices would affect China, they would also affect Japan, South Korea, and Europe. In fact, some of those economies rely even more heavily on Middle Eastern energy. Which means the global consequences of this war would spread far beyond the region. Now let us answer a question: could this war end quickly? It is a big question. Will this war spiral into something massive, or fade out like many conflicts before it? History offers clues. In recent decades, many Middle Eastern conflicts have followed a similar pattern. Step 1: Sudden escalation. Step 2: Dramatic retaliation. Step 3: International pressure. Step 4: Quiet negotiations. And eventually, a fragile pause. Not peace. Just a pause. But here's the scary part. All it takes is one mistake. One missile hits the wrong target. One major casualty event. One miscalculation. And suddenly, a limited conflict can explode into something much bigger. Right now, the Iran war is entering its second week. Missiles are still flying. Diplomats are working behind closed doors. And the world is watching closely. What happens next could reshape the Middle East, and even the global balance of power. So let's ask ourselves something. Will this war end quickly? Or could it turn into the next major global conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to DFTW for more in-depth geopolitical analysis and receive notifications for our daily uploads.